What if the thing that makes you feel most alone is also the clearest sign of your intelligence? You're in a crowded room, the hum of conversation rising like a tide, laughter echoing against the walls. But your mind is elsewhere, restless, searching. Not bored, not shy. Something deeper. You're not looking for attention. You're looking for clarity. While others seem to thrive on noise, you crave silence like a lifeline. You wonder, why do I feel most alive when I'm alone? And why does the world make that feel like a flaw? This is not social awkwardness. This is not introversion as a personality trait. This is something more elusive, more ancient, something that thinkers like Arthur Schopenhauer saw as a core trait of the intellectually evolved. A preference for solitude, not out of fear, but out of necessity. And yet, society often paints solitude as a defect, the loner, the misfit, the outcast. We live in a culture that romanticizes connection, exalts extroversion, and commodifies charisma. You are told to network more, get out there, make small talk, build your brand. But what if this endless social engagement, this constant emotional expenditure pulls you further from yourself? What if being constantly surrounded by others actually makes you forget who you are? Here lies the paradox. The more deeply you think, the more difficult it becomes to find company that doesn't feel like compromise. Schopenhauer wrote, "A man can be himself only so long as he is alone." He argued that true individuality, true mental clarity, is often incompatible with the herd. Not because the herd is bad, but because the noise of collective thought dulls the sharp edge of personal insight. And when your mind is wired not just to think, but to question the very roots of thinking, solitude becomes more than a refuge. It becomes the only place where truth doesn't get drowned. But this brings us to a deeper, more unsettling question. If intelligence leads us to isolation, does wisdom demand we embrace it? For centuries, this conflict has haunted both philosophy and psychology. The Buddhists spoke of detachment not as an escape, but as liberation. Nietzsche warned that those who walk alone often do so because they are forging a path no one else has seen yet. Jung saw the psyche not as a blank slate, but a layered labyrinth, one that could only be fully explored in silence. Even modern psychology suggests that highly intelligent individuals exhibit reduced dopamine response to external stimuli, meaning, simply, that they do not seek pleasure from constant social interaction in the same way others might. They're not broken. They're differently tuned. You might recognize this in yourself, that vague discomfort when surrounded by shallow conversation, the way your thoughts seem to expand when you're walking alone, the relief that floods in when the door finally shuts and it's just you and your mind. You've probably been told this makes you antisocial. But what if it makes you honest? Let's explore what Schopenhauer really meant, why the brightest minds so often walk alone, not out of despair, but out of design. Why the road to depth is narrow, unpaved, and curiously empty. And what it means, not just to be smart, but to be awake in a world that rarely is. Because maybe solitude isn't your exile. Maybe it's your home. What if the reason you feel most alive in solitude is because that's the only time your mind stops lying to itself? Schopenhauer didn't simply glorify solitude as a lifestyle choice, he saw it as an existential necessity for the thinking mind. His worldview, often labeled pessimistic, wasn't born from bitterness, but from an unflinching gaze into the core of human desire. He believed that most people are not truly alive, only animated by blind will chasing pleasure, distraction, validation. And the more intelligent you are, the more unbearable that blind chase becomes. To Schopenhauer, the human will is irrational and ceaseless. It drives us to crave, to consume, to attach meaning to the meaningless. And while most are swept along by its current, the thinker, especially the deeply intelligent thinker, begins to see the current for what it is, a trap disguised as purpose. This moment of awakening is not joyous, it is disorienting, but it is also the beginning of freedom. Imagine your mind as a room filled with mirrors. When you're constantly around others, the reflections multiply every opinion, every glance, every subtle social cue distorting your image of yourself. But when you're alone, truly alone, those mirrors begin to fall away. What's left is a single, unflinching reflection. No filters, no noise, just the raw contours of your own mind. And that is terrifying. That is sacred. Thinkers like Schopenhauer and those who came after him like Kierkegaard, Camus, and even Jung understood this solitude not as loneliness, but as presence. A presence so intense that most people run from it. Because silence, to the average mind, is a vacuum to be filled. But to the contemplative soul, silence is space to perceive, to question, to be. Psychologically, highly intelligent people often report lower satisfaction from external stimulation. A 2016 study published in the British Journal of Psychology found that the more intelligent a person is, the less happiness they derive from frequent social interaction. It is not that they dislike others, it is that their minds are simply more active when left to wander. Their dopamine pathways are optimized not for chatter, but for contemplation. You've felt this, haven't you? That inexplicable sense of expansion when you're deep in thought. That moment when you're reading something profound or walking under a gray sky, and suddenly everything feels connected. It's not happiness exactly, it's clarity. It's reality unfolding without the veil of performance. And here's where the paradox sharpens. The more clarity you gain, the harder it is to return to the trivial. You begin to see the subtext in conversations, the unconscious needs behind people's actions, the subtle performance that runs through almost every social exchange. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. But this isn't cynicism, it's discernment. Schopenhauer didn't believe the world was evil, just indifferent. And to navigate such a world requires a kind of philosophical armor, not made of steel, but of solitude. That solitude becomes a workshop for the mind, a forge where your thoughts are tested not by applause but by resistance. There is no echo chamber there, no validation loop, just the brutal honesty of your own logic, your own questions, your own contradictions. So ask yourself, when was the last time you were truly alone? Not just without people, but without distraction. No phone, no music, no narrative pulling your attention away. Just you and the unfiltered architecture of your mind. How long did it take before you reached for something, anything, to drown it out? Because here lies the truth that most will never touch. Solitude is not where we go to escape life. It's where we finally encounter it. You are not empty when you're alone. You're unmasked. And that perhaps is why those who see most deeply walk most quietly. Imagine waking up in a life that feels borrowed. You follow the routine. You smile when you should. You answer messages, show up to things, laugh at the right moments. But somewhere beneath all that, beneath the gestures, the roles, the polite fictions, you feel it. A quiet ache, like you're standing just behind the glass of your own life, watching someone else live it. This isn't depression. It's dissonance. A dissonance that whispers, this isn't really me. And you've probably tried to explain it. Maybe once, in a late-night conversation or a moment of rare honesty, you said, sometimes I just want to be alone. Not as an escape, not because you're overwhelmed, but because that's the only time anything makes sense. And maybe someone answered with concern or confusion or the dreaded question, are you okay? But what if the need to be alone isn't a cry for help? It is a cry for truth. Many people carry their identity like a mask that's fused to the skin. They forget it's even there. But if you are among the rare few who notice, who feel the itch of that mask, you begin to realize how much of what we call connection is in fact performance. A game of mutual projection. And if you can play that game, if your mind rebels against it, people will label you distant, cold, aloof. But in truth, you may just be honest. More honest than most can tolerate. Schopenhauer believed that people seek others not out of affection, but out of fear. Fear of silence, fear of reflection, fear of themselves. He said, ordinary people are like clockwork dolls. They are driven by external forces, unaware of their inner emptiness. And if you are not a clockwork doll, if you are among those few who feel the emptiness instead of fleeing from it, you are also the one who has the chance to fill it with something real. That path is not easy. It is not lit. And it is certainly not crowded. You may have noticed that the deeper your thoughts go, the harder it is to share them. Try expressing your existential questions at a dinner party. Try talking about your fear of meaninglessness or your craving for silence, or how beauty makes you ache instead of smile. Watch the room grow quiet, awkward. Watch people change the subject, not because they're unkind, but because they cannot follow you where you go. They've never had to. And so loneliness creeps in, not the loneliness of lacking people, but the loneliness of lacking mirrors, of seeing the world in ways that others don't, of feeling deeply, but having no place to put it. That's the emotional paradox of solitude for the intelligent. You crave aloneness, but not because you hate the world. It's because you love it too fiercely to endure its shallowness. You want to touch its soul, not skim its surface. And yet most of it is surface. This is why solitude isn't an escape. It's a return to the part of you that doesn't need to perform, doesn't need to explain, the part of you that simply is. It's in those quiet interior moments when you're walking alone in the rain, or reading something that cracks you open, or staring at the sky without needing to name it, that your soul finally exhales, that the ache subsides, not because it's gone, but because it's been heard. Nietzsche once wrote, "Those who were seen dancing were thought to be insane by those who could not hear the music." Maybe that's what your solitude is, a kind of dance, set to a rhythm only you can hear. A refusal to move in time with a world that doesn't feel real. So next time you find yourself alone, and the silence settles in like a weight, don't flinch. Sit with it. Let it speak. Not every silence is empty. Some are waiting for you to listen. You've walked through the silence now. You've felt its edges, how sharp they can be. You've seen how solitude, when misunderstood, can feel like exile, but when embraced, becomes something else entirely. Not loneliness, not withdrawal, but truth, raw, unsweetened, undiluted. The truth is, most of the world is addicted to noise, external validation, endless distraction. The idea of being truly alone, not just physically but psychically, terrifies people, because in that space, there are no more mirrors, no more applause, no more scripts. Just you. And what you find there is often the very thing you've spent your whole life avoiding. But you didn't turn away. And that matters. What Schopenhauer understood, what thinkers like Jung and Kierkegaard and Hesse echoed in their own ways, is that solitude is not just a space, it's a furnace. A place where all the masks melt, where your ego, your anxieties, your borrowed desires all begin to crack, revealing not an emptiness but a foundation. A quiet center, a self untouched by comparison. In a world that constantly tells you to connect, there is quiet rebellion in disconnecting. Not from people entirely, but from noise, from roles, from expectation. You're not meant to disappear. You're meant to distill, to strip away the layers that are not yours, to come back to a version of you that isn't tangled in performance. And that journey often requires silence. Schopenhauer wasn't suggesting that solitude makes you superior. He was suggesting that it makes you real. And reality, for the thinking mind, is often a heavier burden than illusion, but it is also the only place where meaning can survive. So here's the paradox to carry with you. You are not alone in your solitude. Others are out there walking their own quiet paths, seeing the world with unflinching eyes, wondering if their sensitivity is a curse when, in fact, it might be the most honest thing about them. You may not meet them often, but they exist. And in some strange, unseen way, they are walking with you. And perhaps the greatest act of courage isn't to fill the silence, but to sit with it. To trust that in your stillness, something deeper is speaking. You don't need to explain this to anyone. You don't need to defend your preference for the quiet, for the unshared thought, for the long, slow walks with your own mind. Let others seek the crowd. Let them chase the loud. You, meanwhile, can return to your solitude like a sacred place. Not a prison, a temple. So the next time you find yourself misunderstood for needing space, remember this. It's not because you're broken. It's because you were listening to a frequency most people don't even know exists. The question was never, why do intelligent people prefer to be alone? The question is, how could they possibly survive if they didn't? And maybe, just maybe, Solitude isn't the absence of connection. Maybe it's the beginning of the deepest one. Thank you for watching.